Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Odd video today, kind of a 2-for-1. Mostly it's going to be my hot take on the new Breitling Super AVI 765, but there's going to be a little bit at the end, which is also a follow-up to my prediction video of what I thought that watch would be. Spoiler alert, I don't think I could have got it much more wrong. There were some elements in my thinking that have been borne out, but generally I got it totally wrong. What I should say before I go on, this is a hot take, not a critique, not a review, based solely on the same photos, videos, renders that you have seen. I take what I say now with a grain of salt, so you definitely should too. If you're still interested in that, see you on the other side of the intro and we'll get into it. Okay, so I'll cut to the chase and start with the obvious. What do I think of the new Super AVI 765? One, it is drop dead gorgeous. Starting with the basic material of the AVI 765, a watch that Breitling sort of reintroduced about 2 years ago from their original design back from the early 50s. The meat of this, the bones of this watch are so classically beautiful that it's hard to screw up. Then take that and do some really clever interpretations with colors and some styles. And across the board, these Super AVI 765s are really, really pretty. So I'm not going to go into it too much. You can see the videos as much as I can. You can see the images as well as I can. Across the board, these are just really good looking watches. Sensible and intelligent updates to take the old design to the new, and some really interesting, but I think pretty complementary color choices. So there you go, we're done. It's a gorgeous watch. Except for one little problem. It's 46 millimeters. Now, 46 millimeters is an interesting idea in that a lot of people are going to be hypercritical of the watch because of that size. For me, that's like being critical of a pair of jeans that doesn't fit you. It doesn't mean the design is bad, it just means it doesn't fit you. So I'm a bigger guy, I'm 6'4", the watch is going to fit, and I've got an 8-ish inch wrist. So for me, this watch is a doddle. It'll fit me fine. For a lot of other people, it won't. But, you know, like I said, I don't see that as a criticism of the watch. It might be a criticism of the brand for not having another watch in the same size, but that's a different issue. There is something that does bug me a little bit, and that's the thickness. It's one thing to have a watch that's large, but this watch is thick as well at 15.9 mils thick. Now, for a chronograph with 70 hours power reserve, 100 meters water resistance, display case back, and a GMT, when you start taking all of that and compare it to something like a Tudor Black Bay, you know, just GMT, that is, you know, not a whole lot thinner at 15 millimeters, maybe it's not that bad. But the problem I have stylistically is this seems to have resulted in some big slab sides, and that's something that does really annoy me. So from a distance and straight down, this AVI 765 is stunning, and there's not much I could recommend to change it. I can tolerate the sizing issue. Like I said, size is sort of, it fits you or it doesn't. 46 millimeters is going to fit me fine. Others may vary, but for me it's going to be fine. The thickness though, that bugs me a little bit. So that's my personal take on this watch. From an industry point of view, from a consumer point of view, is it a hit or a miss for the wider consumer base? I think not. I think that this is going to be a bit of a problem for some people. What for me, as I just described, is a sizing issue, and it fits you or it doesn't. Some people seem to take that very personally, and if the watch is not designed for them, it's a bad watch. And there's going to be a lot of people who really don't like this watch, and they're going to call it a bad watch because it doesn't fit them. So it does raise an interesting question about why did Breitling go for a 46mm? In 2021, when the world is making a bigger and bigger deal about smaller and smaller watches, what was going on there? Now, interestingly, at work, we often talk about the 5 whys. That is, if you're trying to solve a problem, ask yourself why 5 times. Why did they do this? Answer that. Why is that true? Answer that, and so on and so forth. So trying to follow that path of why is this a 46mm, I really started to think and stepped back. And the first place to look is to realize that watches don't exist in isolation. Watches exist within a catalog. And so sizes and so forth are routinely set not by some number, as I said, in isolation, but rather how does this fit into a catalog? Which made me go look at the new Breitling catalog. I was curious about the Super AVI collection that we were promised, this brand new, never seen before collection. And one thing you'll note that there isn't a Super AVI collection. There is a classic AVI collection. That's interesting. Open that up and what you'll find is that there's other members of the classic AVI collection. It's not just the Super AVI 765. There is also the older Aviator 8 chronographs that were previously in the Aviator line. So here, that then made me think, hang on a sec, what happened to the Aviator line? Go up and look at the collection. The Aviator collection has gone, and all the watches in it have either been discontinued or moved across to this new classic AVI line. So what you've now got is within the classic AVI line, the old Aviator 8 chronographs at 43mm and the new Super AVI 765s at 46mm, thus essentially replicating what Breitling has also done in their Chronomat series, where you have a 42mm Chronomat and then a larger 44mm Super Chronomat. If you look at the sizings of the Navitimer, another classic pilot's watch, they too jump from 43 up to 46mm. Interestingly, all of the GMT Navitimers are themselves 46mm. So suddenly, why is this a 46? Starts to make sense. It's the size it is because that's where the hole in the catalog was. When they decided to create the classic AVI collection and then import the already 43mm watches, which if you look at them, many of them follow the same template. There is a Mosquito version. There was already a Warhawk, Curtis Warhawk version. Then the 46 suddenly becomes obvious. You can see why it is what it is. Obviously, those smaller watches, those slightly older watches, were not yet ready for an update. So rather than withdraw watches which are probably still in circulation, probably still selling okay, rather than withdraw those and replace them quite quickly, they simply did the reverse of what they did with the Super Chronomats, which is they brought the Super Chronomat out. In this case, they brought the Super AVI out first, and I suspect we'll see an update of these things later. Another interesting issue around the introduction of these new watches is the watches that vanished from sight. And this is where it is interesting and where some of my thoughts around, my previous thoughts about where they were going, where Breitling was going, weren't entirely out of whack. Because you see, a lot of my thinking around where was Breitling going to go was based around the idea that I think there's a gap in their collection around that kind of dress, travel, tool, semi-sport kind of watch. Now, what I've got in mind here, I think when I mentioned it, a lot of you guys went more heavily on the dress than the kind of tool dress, sport dress than I had in mind. For me, the kind of a watch I had in mind as an analog for that kind of dress travel if you looked at like a Breitling collection, it would be the old Trans Oceans. But if you wanted to compare it to something modern, it would be like the GMT Master 2. That's kind of the model I had in my head for this kind of dress tool watch, travel oriented thing that I thought they were going to bring out. And before anyone says, what am I talking about? The GMT Master is a sports watch. Well, you're wrong. It was designed for airline pilots. It's a dress tool watch. It's not sports at all. So put that to one side. Yeah, so I thought they were going to do that because one, there's a bit of a hole in their catalog in that space. And secondly, because the B35 World Timer is kind of homeless. It lived for a while in the Galactic and didn't quite ever take hold. It's lived in the Aviator line for a little while, and it hasn't really found a home there either. So I thought they were going to move it around. Instead, what they did, killed it. That movement, that watch is no longer in catalog. I cannot find it on the Breitling website at all. Likewise, the Aviator Super 8, the large 46mm titanium one with the green dial or the steel one with the black dial, gone, no longer in catalog. Interestingly, that further reduces the number of watches in the Breitling catalog using the Kinesi movement shared with Tudor. So that's also kind of interesting for me, that there's been a couple of things happening at the same time. This rationalization of the catalog, this getting rid of watches that aren't really performing very well, and also a real focus on using their in-house chronograph movement with a variety of complications added to it. It's an interesting direction that Breitling is taking there. And I think if I'm looking to the future around what Breitling's doing, that's certainly something that I think is worth us watching. So to sum this up, what are my thoughts? A, I think the new Super AVIs are gorgeous watches. I think that the size will be polarizing. There'll be a small number of people like myself for whom it fits beautifully and we're just going to think it's great. I, though, do share a concern about its thickness, and I just don't like thick watches. So and the slab side that's going to result in. That's probably my only reservation on this watch from a stylistic point of view. Having said that, if I step back and look at the wider catalog and where Breitling is taking that catalog, whilst the sizing is going to be divisive, I can certainly see why it is what it is. Given that there's already a 43, given the relationship between the sizing in the classic AVI line and the Navitimer line, it kind of makes sense. It might not be for you, it might not be something that you like, but the sizing makes sense from a catalog and worldwide kind of just selling watches perspective. Finally, yeah, I completely screwed up my predictions for this. I blame George Kern. He said all new, never seen before. I don't think that taking an existing collection and modifying it a little bit counts as all new, never seen before, George. So you kind of led me astray there. But I've got my eye on you. I know next time that I'm not going to trust you that much. Anyway, I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, not you. What are your thoughts on this watch? I suspect I reckon I know what most of you are going to say. Too big, too thick. There's probably going to be some other comments, but I reckon that's going to be pretty common. I also think there's going to be a lot of comments about this is typical Breitling, big, flashy, blah, 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 gym owner type stuff. I think there's an interesting issue around Breitling simply ignoring the negative impacts of that stereotype. I've seen, quick diversion, I've seen a lot in many, many videos. Breitling have said we sell what sells, not what social media likes. And I reckon that's what they're going to do here too. Anyway, as I said, I kind of went off on a bit of a ramble at the end. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you later.